What do you think, Congressman?
Well, Greta, there's no question that the BP spill was an absolute disaster. It showed a lot of complacency on the part of BP. You're right, the response plan was totally inadequate, partly because, in fact, there had been tens of thousands of wells drilled over the years, and because nothing serious had ever really gone wrong, there was no experience in how do you handle a deep water, high pressure spill. And so the solutions had to be invented right there on the spot going forward. And the government did its part in worsening the disaster. The MMA that was responsible for the oversight, Minerals Management Service, they in fact had nonsensical things such as what to do with de-oiling walruses and things like that. And in fact, there are no walruses in the Gulf of Mexico. So there's no question that we were not prepared for this disaster. Having said that, a lot of new technologies have been developed in response to it, so I think that helps going forward. But the other thing is that you know, there are many other rigs out there who've been drilling. They've drilled just fine. They've done a good job. And so right after this spill began, the President brought 10 experts, scientific experts, together and said, what should we do? And each and every one of them said, well, we have a lot to do, but we should not put a moratorium on drilling. Despite that, the President did slap a moratorium on drilling in deep water and in shallow water. Secretary Salazar followed through with that. We asked that those be lifted. Then there were lawsuits, and in fact, Secretary Salazar was found in contempt of court for continuing moratoriums. Finally, slowly but surely, a few permits have been issued. I think we're up to about 9 at this point. And so even the government, through its issuing of permits, is acknowledging that it's okay to drill again, but we still need to follow through on analyzing what went wrong, what were the core problems that led to this disaster, and what can we do in the future. In the meantime, we're seeing tens of thousands of jobs that have been killed off, and rigs that have now left and gone to Brazil, Nigeria, Egypt, taking the jobs with them. And interestingly enough, in the case of Brazil, our government has actually given Brazil money to help them in their offshore drilling. So what will eventually happen is we will be buying back from Brazil oil that's being drilled off their shores under more lax rules than we have and regulations. And in fact, they've got our jobs, and we'll be paying them for oil that should be drilled off of our shore. So we've really got a lot to do to get the Gulf of Mexico back up in terms of drilling. And finally, I'll add that our oil production now has dropped from 1.7 million barrels a day in the Gulf of Mexico down to 1.59 million barrels, and dropping quickly. It's going to drop another 250,000 barrels per day in the coming year. And even if we started issuing permits at the same rate we have in the past, it'll continue downward for a period of time before it begins to return.
Congressman Fleming is our guest this morning, splitting up the phone lines with Gulf Coast residents dialing in at 202-737-0001, and all others can call in at 202-737-0002. Let's go to Stan, who's a Gulf Coast resident in Panama City, Florida. You're on the air.
Is this me?
Yeah, it's you.
Okay. First thing I want to do is I love C-SPAN. I watch it all the time. You still there?
Yeah, we're listening, Stan.
Okay, and I realized something, that when they gave out all the money from BP, everybody went down and filled out their little papers, and they were getting on an average about $5,000 apiece. They signed off on having any lawsuit towards BP, and I told a friend of mine, I said, did you put any of it back paying your taxes? And he more or less now that the end of the tax period has come, in the newspaper we got over 1,000 people that went to Department of Justice for fraud. So I figure that BP will probably assault these people with trying to get their money back. The government waited till after the tax line so that they'd get their money, and now I'm sure that there will be, I think there was like 54,000 different claims, so they're going to sift through them, and they're going to get their money back.
Congressman?
Well, I'm not absolutely sure of the caller's point in that, but I will say this. We had a field hearing in Houma, Louisiana earlier this week, the Committee Natural Resources, and we heard testimony from folks who come from the oil and gas industry, folks who come from the fishing industry. And one thing that really rang true is that while Mr. Feinberg, who is responsible for analyzing the damages and compensating businesses and individuals for the damage, that employees are getting paid for, let's say, restaurants and so forth that are now not up and operating. But the actual businesses, the seafood businesses, seem to be in many cases put on hold. In one case, a shrimp company, they catch the shrimp, they process the shrimp. They've actually sent the paperwork in 10 times and not received a response. They're told that their paperwork is lost. We understand that of the $20 billion that was set aside for compensation, only about $2.5 billion has been spent so far, and there seems a certain level of chaos. So we're going to be asking Mr. Feinberg to come back and speak to us on this issue and to really delve into and perhaps hold his feet to the fire as to why claims are not being processed in a timely way.
The numbers, Congressman, the numbers seem to vary. CEO Bob Dudley of BP writes today in the Wall Street Journal that they've paid out about $5 billion to claimants. The papers are reporting the figure to be more like $3.8 billion.
Mm-hmm. Well, any way you divide it, it's only a fraction of the total set aside of $20 billion. So, and we're now a year down the road, and companies are telling me that they're having to go into credit lines to stay up, hoping that some way they will be compensated. We met with Mr. Feinberg early on, and what he said was going to be his approach. And for your viewers, Mr. Feinberg is also the person who took care of the 9/11 people affected from the disaster that happened there, and is well respected for having done a good job. But what we're hearing is that, or what he told us was that first he would write checks to kind of get people through, maybe $25,000 at a time, even if their claim had very little documentation. But then he would loop back around and require a lot more documentation for a final settlement. But what we're hearing is some people have received absolutely no funds whatsoever after providing reams of documentation. So, and I think it's uneven. I think some people are fairly satisfied, and there's some people who feel like they've not been treated well at all. So we need to get to the bottom of this. I don't think there's anything malicious, and this is not BP. This is Mr. Feinberg, who is paid by BP, but he's accountable to those who've been injured in this. And we still have issues of competency we need to deal with. There's over 3,000 employees apparently, and that's a big operation. So we need to get to the bottom of this. We need to be sure that businesses get timely payment, because if you're not making money in business, then you're losing your assets, and that business may never return.
Congressman, the Washington Post did a piece last